I think a lot of people, when they look at a podcast that has leadership in the title, they might be a little bit scared and say, well, leadership is for other people, and they might not have the traits that are historically associated with leadership. What would you say to people like that? Do you think leaders are born or made, or is it a little bit of both?
I don't think it's a little bit of both. I think people learn to lead.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fairly sure of that, and I think there are some examples. Go to a soccer pitch on a Saturday morning and watch 8-year-olds. After the play, the kids will circle around one individual.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that this individual was born with it?
Mm-hmm.
I think what it means is that person likes that role, likes that relationship with others, and will complement what they do. Will maybe even make suggestions about what to do after the game, etc.
Mm-hmm.
It is influence.
Yeah.
And influence can be learned at age 8 or before, and influence can also be learned by making a conscious choice.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned influence. What are some of the skills that might make someone a better influencer of the people around them?
I think you have to know something about what is being led. That is the activity that's being shared.
Sure.
I call that task skills.
Okay.
And then you have to have good knowledge on behavioral skills. What is it that will influence others in a positive way?
Right.
There was a quote that came out of the 60s that said, if you would move people, move them toward an image that's positive for them.
Mm-hmm.
So if what you're doing supports renewable energy, people have a purpose well beyond that leader. And a wise leader reminds people of their contribution to the purpose.
So, I'm sorry, in some of your experiences, what are your favorite examples of people who have set this very high goal that is even beyond the leader itself?
Wow. One of them I have to refer to is FedEx. FedEx does a beautiful job of developing leaders, and they do it by hiring people who will have, if you will, a daily frontline job and giving them the confidence that they can lead. There's a story out of FedEx that says that a route driver went out with his truck to get the packages out of the curbside boxes where people throw the envelopes and so forth. And he arrived at a box at a corner. He has a deadline. They have to make the jet so that it goes to the Memphis hub. And discovered that someone had forced chewing gum into the lock. And he couldn't get it out and couldn't get the box open. Step one, call the office, make sure somebody else picks up all the rest of his route. Another somebody comes and gets the envelopes he already has. The other somebody was to bring tools. He showed up and found that this driver, with a crescent wrench, had unbolted the box from the concrete and alone was trying to get it in the back of the truck. And the goal, to take a cutting torch to it, to open it up so that even if there's just one envelope in there, it also makes it.
Wow.
It's the celebration of that effort to provide 100% service that starts the journey that says, okay, can you think for yourself? Now, how does the leader, the supervisor of that person, make sure that story gets spread? Is it consistent with values? Is there an award for the individual? And does the individual himself, herself, end up in a setting that says, you too can lead?
Wow. Yeah, so companies can teach leadership skills undoubtedly, right?
Yes.
What are some other ways that leaders, maybe if they're college students or even just starting out in the workforce, can start to develop their leadership skills?
I think the first item is actually surprisingly passive. It's reflection. I like to ask, Penn State students. Sorry. I like to ask Penn State students what they have done already that involves leadership, or have they been led? Well, we're led by teachers. We're led by family members. We're led by community service people, leaders in faith-based environments, all kinds of situations. If they simply first reflect on what had positive impact and what didn't feel right. They'll quickly realize where they are on a spectrum. Are they making what I call one of the leadership mistakes? The leadership mistake to me is the person misunderstands the job. They think it is their job to tell other people what to do and then enforce it.
Yes.
Exactly wrong.
Okay.
It becomes caustic over time.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, it's to create common goal,
Right.
carve out a piece of that goal, show the person that they can even develop beyond the job they're currently doing, provide that opportunity.
And I think it must take some security to be able to give that power to other people, right? What are some
For
situations you've seen where leaders are secure and that helps out everyone around them?
I'll go back to FedEx.
Okay.
This particular person was my former student.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time I was in Smeal, I was faculty. He's a few years younger than I was. And he's finishing a bachelor's in business logistics.
Yeah.
I asked him after he went to the Flying Tigers air terminal in Cleveland, I asked him if we could bring a video camera operator and just take a look at what a sort looks like.
Sure.
They collect from around the city and they're packaging it in pallets, and it's going to go, in this case it was an old DC-8 jet. And pardon me, and in doing so I wanted to see how he handled others. And one of the big takeaways was a briefing in the beginning that included a bit of spirit building and also included judgment about where heavier items go, the fact that it's going to be wrapped in strapping and covered with plastic in order to be protected. So they had to make judgments about density of freight, lighter density on top.
Right.
The shape has to fit the inside of the main deck of an aircraft, all of that.
Yeah.
It was more about the spirit than it was about doing the task. Most of his employees were college students.
Okay.
They were part-time, and it was the middle of the night.
Yeah.
And then it ended after all the pallets are up and on the aircraft. The entire crew stood there, lined up, facing the jet. And I thought, what is this? And the answer was, they were to clap when the door closed. Oh, just once. They clapped once, and then they could go home. The reward for the night, for the shift, was to have it finished correctly first, correctly, safely, quickly. And they were to celebrate the end of their work. It was a spirit builder for the following night when they would do it all over again.
Yeah. I think that's actually a great example. Part of leadership is to be able to celebrate wins, and it's also to hold people accountable when they lose. And I think that's a very difficult line to be able to toe as a leader, where you're encouraging people and making sure that they feel rewarded for all of their efforts. But when things go bad, you kind of have to be the quote unquote bad guy. How have you seen leaders navigate those situations?
That is a super question. I think they do the navigation best when they ask themselves, do I know the person? If there is a mistake, and it is not due to negligence on the part of the employee, or worse, bad attitude, or worse than that, sabotage, it's far less about consequences than it is about learning. So if it happened accidentally because something was not foreseen, the thing that I found, and I have led, and I've actually made this judgment for myself, I ask myself, will this person learn from it? That's one question.
Yes.
The deeper question is this person already chastising himself or herself? If they are, don't pile on.
Okay.
They're already doing the recrimination side. What you want to do is turn it into a lesson. The next time we would, and then you get them to answer that question. And then they have to know that when it's over, it's over. There's not some residual, if I'm the leader, I'm not carrying some residual feeling of, well, I'll tell you what, I'll really watch out for them. If I have a chance to transfer them elsewhere, they're gone. That sort of stuff is neutralized.
Yes.
But if it's passive-aggressive behavior, you're going to have to set boundaries, including a timeline, and say, we cannot see any more of this. We're going to have a discussion 2 months from now, 4 months from now, 6 months from now. If this turns around, we're fine. If this doesn't turn around, one of the two of us is going to be responsible for your departure, and you may want to do that first before I help you.
Now, I think many of us in college are soon going to enter the workforce, and we're not going to have traditional leadership titles. And so I think as a result, we're all going to be followers in a sense. And you just alluded to something that makes a good follower, someone who has an internal standard that they hold themselves to and that they
Yes.
are accountable to as well.
Yes.
What else makes a good follower? I think that's a topic that doesn't get discussed nearly enough.
I agree with you on that one. In fact, I heard someone say several decades ago, why do we teach leadership development inside our firms and we do not teach good followership?
Right.
I think that is an accurate way to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think we do teach, especially today,
Okay.
more modern, we do teach good followership.
Mm-hmm.
Even good onboarding by an HR department when
Mm-hmm.
a new employee comes in.
Yeah.
Items about values, decision making,
Mm.
not complaining sideways and spreading venom, but rather if there is a question or an issue, it's privately handled with your boss.
Right.
And the social distance, it's called power distance between boss and subordinate.
Mm-hmm.
It's not collapsing, but it is much less than it once was.
Okay.
Partly at the insistence of those being employed.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to feel that somehow they're working for some overlord
Yeah.
in a serf type relationship.
Uh-huh.
So I think that one matters a great deal. How do people learn to do that? Much of it is culture.
Mm-hmm.
Culture is the result of the cultural expectations at the top,
Mm-hmm.
and it's also a result of how it is lived out by the employee group.
Yeah.
If there's already an employee group, if this isn't a startup, then much of the culture is there. It is unwritten
Right.
and sometimes even unspoken,
Mm.
which means that new employees have to figure out what's going on.
And
Best source?
Yeah.
Peers.
peers. Okay.
Yes.
So you can tell a lot about a company or an organization's culture from watching the people around you.
Mm-hmm.
What are some specific things that you should watch out for?
I think first and foremost is interpersonal competition
Mm.
more than anything else.
And is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It is a bad thing within the firm. It
Mhm.
is a very good thing firm to firm.
I actually heard a great story about that. Do you watch Formula One?
I have watched Formula.
Okay.
I don't watch it regularly.
So the Mercedes team boss, he tells his employees, find the person who does the exact same thing that you do for Red Bull, their direct competitor,
Yes.
and put a picture of them next to your wall so that you know exactly who you're competing against. But I feel like that very same thing would be toxic within the same organization, right?
Oh, exactly. And the usual basis of competition within the organization is I'll get the next promotion before you do.
Mm.
There are fewer positions going up.
Right.
Someone is not going to get one, but it won't be me.
Yeah.
And that leads to behaviors that can deliberately attempt to diminish a colleague.
Uh-huh.
And if bosses think that the rules of sport,
Yeah.
where competition, this is, I think, fascinating as well. If you do something like gymnastics, men's or women's,
Yeah.
they have to win as a team,
Mhm.
and it's okay to perform individually.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it is the team that advances,
Mm.
not the individual.
Yes.
So if it's the same uniform, we help each other.
Yeah.
If it's a different uniform, we're in competition.
Uh-huh.
One quick element on this. I worked in a company that used the colors blue and white, though they weren't quite Penn State. It wasn't quite Penn State blue. And the major competitor was red and white.
Mhm.
We started the phrase, because there was too much internal career competition,
Yeah.
we started the phrase, competition is reserved for people who work under different colored signs.
Mhm.
And it worked.
Okay.
People actually responded to that and said, wait a minute.
Mhm.
What we're doing is we're sub-optimizing the performance of the company by beating up each other.
Yeah.
We should be maximizing that and beating up the other,
Right.
the competitor.
I think that's very good advice. Now, when someone eventually elevates themselves from a follower role into a leader role, I think that there's a little bit of insecurity with that. We talked about insecurity a little bit earlier. What would you say to leaders who are new and maybe don't have the most experience in the field and maybe even don't have that much experience leading in general?
Wow. Multiple items. I would start with reflection. I hope the person anticipates that leadership is coming
Yeah.
in their career.
Right.
So reflection, how have I been led?
Mhm.
What have I learned not to do is
Yes.
as important as what I have learned to do from good leaders
Yeah.
I've worked with. So that's one input. I think that's a pretty important input. There are other aspects to consider.
Mm-hmm.
One of the big mistakes for new leaders
Mm-hmm.
is they totally misunderstand what leadership is.
Mm.
This is something you and I have talked about offline, and it's
Yeah.
it's that element that says, I'm here to control the situation and to tell people what to do.
Yeah.
No, you're not.
Right.
You're here to organize people. In fact, the older framework was planning, organizing, staffing, directing, controlling.
Mm-hmm.
Well, notice that controlling sits at the end of that.
Right.
That has to be done with a great deal of subtlety.
Yes.
You have to do it by measurement, not by barking orders on an hourly or even minute-to-minute basis.
Yeah.
So that's a mistake that can get made. The insecurity thing is surprisingly common. One estimate is that 1 out of every 6 new leaders,
Yeah.
and even if it's a promotion but not to a leadership job, you'll get imposter syndrome.
Right.
There's a lot has been written recently on imposter syndrome. It basically says, I'm not prepared. I'm not ready.
Yeah.
I have run succession planning systems inside companies. And when you ask the question, who should be a candidate for an opening when it occurs?
Yeah.
One of the things you look for is degree of readiness. If you always say, have to be ready to the 99% level, you're not allowing people to grow. You have a backlog. You have a line around the block, so to speak, of talented people, but you can't use them. The rule I like to use is if the person is internal, already knows us, has good connections inside the organization, if they're 50% ready, give them a shot.
Wow. 50%.
And do so with a boss who recognizes there's a 50%, where the 50% strength is and where the gap is.
Yeah.
And in fact, will coach the performance.
Right.
This has to be a boss who is dedicated to the development of others. Decades ago, IBM said 1 out of 7 bosses is a natural developer of their people.
Okay.
About 2/3 can do it, but in some ways have to be taught to do it because it's not automatic.
Right.
The reason being, the middle group is focusing more than they should on task and focusing less than they should on behaviors, and especially developmental behaviors.
Yes.
Put people in assignments where they can stretch and grow.
Right.
Temporary assignments.
Yeah.
Things like that.
That's very important, I think, because a lot of my friends are seniors and they're on their way out of their leadership roles right now. And so they're thinking about, okay, who's going to take over after me? And I think what you just alluded to of putting people in roles where they can grow themselves, and then also managing that growth and making sure that it progresses the way that you want it to progress seems so important, right?
You just spotted something, and that is the person who takes responsibility for his or her growth, the employee.
Yes.
Those are the employees most likely to be chosen for the next level, more than anything else.
Yeah.
And you don't have to say, get the spotlight in my face, look how well I'm developing myself. You just do it.
Yeah.
And what is it that you do? You volunteer for an assignment,
Right.
and you learn from it. You volunteer for something where you're not the head of the table.
Yeah.
Somebody with more experience is. You're at the side of the table.
Yes.
But when you add your value, you be sure that you add your value in a way that isn't, once again, about spotlight in your face, but it involves the team.
Right.
When you have team influence, it's almost automatic that you might be chosen for the first level leadership.
Yes. I think a lot of leaders find themselves in situations where they're surrounded by yes men and loyalists. And I think that's probably part of the nature of leadership, where when you get high enough, there are some perceived costs of challenging the leader. But that disagreement is also vital. So how have you seen leaders create environments where they foster genuine discussion and also disagreement?
That leader has to have an acceptance that conflict is okay, and has to create a climate where conflict is about issues, not about people.
I like that.
There has to be that strong bond around the table, if you will, when options, ideas are being put out there.
Okay.
There also needs to be a clear understanding of when the debate is occurring, is the leader asking for input, or is the leader asking for brainstorming, or is the leader asking for the group to make the decision? And at times, when you want the group to make the decision so they have the commitment to it,
right,
when there is still a significant group that thinks the chosen direction is exactly wrong, you you have to reel it back in.
Uh-huh.
The leader has to reel this in such a way as to say, here's my reminder.
Yeah.
Once we decide on this, we're all committed to it. There is not a partial commitment.
Right.
There is nothing halfway about what it is that we're doing. The rules for expressing conflict have to reduce the price that your question alluded to.
Right.
I think the best leaders, especially in senior jobs in the C-suite, understand what causes yes person among their staff.
Yeah.
When you get to the C-suite, every move is about resources. Who gets the resources to do what? And every move among C-suite leaders is visible to the others. It becomes more about resources and it becomes more political.
Right.
So subordinates can fall into the trap of supporting a person when they should be supporting the enterprise through best ideas.
Yeah.
One of the mistakes I see made at the subordinate level is this whole idea that if I support this person whose career is rising quickly, I will rise too. What do they do when that person's career levels off, or worse, the person leaves?
They're in between a rock and a hard place.
I consistently suggest to people individually, don't do this because of who the person is. No matter how much you like the person personally, no matter how much you align with the values, you work for the enterprise.
Right.
You have to at times speak up. Did you consider? Did you consider? It needs to be polite.
Yeah.
And it needs to be clear.
And in your experience, have you seen leaders who don't foster those environments and
yeah.
expect loyalty more than anything from the people around them?
That, I think, is the huge mistake, when loyalty is practically the only expectation.
Right. Yes. I feel like leaders who do that have a selfish mindset from the get-go, where they care more about what's best for them as opposed to what's best for the company or the organization that they're leading, right? And I think another part of leadership is adaptability. And it goes hand in hand with leadership because it changes so much in each situation. Leadership might look different in one industry to another. It might look different time to time. And we've been talking about how leadership is not barking orders at people. I think that was part of the culture in the 80s and the 90s with Jack Welch and maybe even Steve Jobs, where they were these very authoritarian type leaders. So how can leaders adapt to different situations and industries, but also maintain some set of values and principles?
I think it starts with the end of your question. What are the values and the principles?
Right.
Are they clear? Is this about the enterprise? Is it about enterprise success? Is it about enterprise success at all costs? No. It is about success.
Yeah.
And success, to me, the best measure of success is, what do the customers think? Do they find that what you're doing is superior to what others are doing?
Right.
That's how you get the resources flowing your direction and can continue to innovate and move forward. The fear of failure is the opposite side of this. And every leader has asked in a given moment when something unexpected happens, whether it's in the marketplace or it's a conflict among peers in an organization or among units in an organization. Worst case, among silos in an organization.
Right.
Whenever that happens, the fear factor comes in. I honestly think we need to, shall we say, redefine our relationship with failure. The fear of failure causes a freeze in the exchanges leader to subordinate. Subordinates figure it out.
Yeah.
They know when fear is in the air. If you shift slightly to the word failure, it is fear of failure.
Right.
Fail early, often, small, forward, and uniquely. What does that mean? Instead of fearing failure, failure becomes a mechanism to improve. Right. I am a major believer in pilots, and when you start a new initiative, keep it small. Fail early, fail small. Do the pilot before you think you're ready. Get ready in the midst of it, and for heaven's sake, don't do it so that it is a major impact on your brand name, etc. Yes. What you're doing is getting people ready by doing instead of getting people ready by talking.
Yes. I think that's so important.
Significant.
My question I think you brought up a really, really good point there about making sure that people understand, especially leaders, understand what the customers think. But so much of the time, it feels like leaders are they have so much distance between themselves and the people who are on the ground and also the customers themselves. How do they close some of that gap? I mean, I think you talked about like a distance gap earlier. How do they close that to be able to understand what's really going on?
I actually worked in a company that asked leaders who were leading elements of the internals of the company to once a year put themselves in a setting. This particular company had agencies around the country where they were interacting with customers.
Yeah.
And leaders were asked to do the visits. There were 165 officers in the company, and each one of us was asked to literally spend a day with an agent representing customers. Fewer than 25% actually did it, even though by raising their hands at a conference, they promised to do so. I was one of the ones who was actually very interested in what are customers really saying. My preference is not to just look at secondary data. I think there are times you need primary data. You need a story in your head about customer number 3 on Tuesday morning who came in with a certain question and had a certain set of reactions.
Yeah.
That becomes tangible. The only other way to get it is to do what we're doing here, and that is you set up a camera, you set up a microphone, you put actual customers in the conversation, and then you help that story spread internally so that people don't have to do the visits.
Right. So I think the very type of person that's attracted to leadership is someone who has high standards and demands a lot from themselves. And because of this, they might even achieve great results. But as you move higher and higher up an organization, there's less that you can do yourself and more that you need to delegate. But I think a lot of leaders find it very difficult to do so because they want to maintain that level of quality that they had before. So what are some examples of delegation that you've seen, and especially good delegation?
The whole delegation space has to be learned as you're moving up. You can't conquer an entire job. You may be able to do it at front line, but as soon as you begin to grow, even in a frontline position, more routine things that you've already learned need to go to someone else.
Okay.
So that's why the new employee gets the more routine in order to learn the job, etc. So the content of your job is changing even before you lead. It's really changing when you lead.
Right.
And think about this. Each leader has so many subject changes per day. They can't focus on one thing. Their subordinates need a calmer environment to provide that focus and provide the level of excellence. One of the things that I have really encouraged leaders to do is if they find that their personality includes perfectionism, leave leadership. Leading can never be confused with perfection.
Right.
One of the reasons is perfection means we're going to get all the task things done effectively. Given the 168 hours per week we all have, that means you downplay behavioral skills and you downplay building the future. A leader is to build the organization in a way that it must become.
Right.
It has to deal with its competitors, its environment, the changing desires of its customers.
Yeah.
The future skills can't be ignored, and they're often ignored if there's too much attention to task.
Right.
So you asked about delegation. I think delegation is a process. The best system I've ever seen. Imagine it's a Tuesday, and the boss says to the subordinate, okay, a week from this coming Friday, so it's not 4 days from now, but it's rather 11 days from now, we need to have the following finished. It needs to be data. We're getting ready for a meeting.
Yeah.
Here's what I'd like you to do. Build it so that we can meet this kind of goal. Here's where the first mistake often comes in. The leader does not stop the action and check for understanding. And it's a mistake for the subordinate, because if the subordinate has no questions, if the subordinate does not stop the action and say, let me feed that back to you, it is highly likely that two things are going to happen 10 days from now. The work won't be done because other things intervene. That's a subordinate problem and a boss problem. And the second thing that's going to happen is what will be presented didn't meet the assignment. You've got to check for understanding. It's the reason I even do it in a safety briefing. So you check for understanding. The best leaders will then say, 48 hours from right now, there's even a look at a phone or a watch. 48 hours from right now, I want you to contact me. It can be a text, that's fine. I want you to tell me 2 things you've already done to make this happen for 11 days from now. So 2 days out, we now have 9 days. Why does the boss ask for that? In case he needs a mid-course correction, or she.
Right.
So in doing it in that fashion, now do you check in again 5 days prior? You might. And one of the ways to do that is to ask for a rehearsal. Would you mind coming to my office? All we need is 15 minutes. Show me your lead-in slides. I don't need all the data. You don't have to have this done. Just show me your lead-in. What that means is that Wednesday before Friday, you already know that this thing is going to be on time.
Right.
And complete.
So that deadline is not the day to start checking in on people. It's a series of check-ins.
Talk about mistakes. The thing I've seen most often is they check in on Thursday for the Friday, the following day presentation.
And at that point, you're way too late.
Way too late, yes.
What do you think the role of listening is in leadership?
Listening. I think it's first role. What did Stephen Covey say? The 5th habit says, seek to understand, then to be understood. You start with listening. And how do you listen? You don't ask angry questions. You don't ask even closed-ended questions. You ask open-ended questions.
Right.
So what are we facing in that segment of the market right now? Is an open question. It can be opinion. It can be opinion plus. That is, we have some data on this. It can be my instinct, my past experience, whatever. And it's okay to ask those questions. Is this primarily based on what you've discovered before? Great. Thank you. Keep going. You get what you need with a combination of open-ended questions and not confusing yourself as the leader.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for watching. That was our interview with Dr. Ken Graham. It was cut a little bit short, but it is what it is. Thank you to Zeke for all the production and the editing, and thank you for tuning in.